Hello everyone, we are back in my Monstropolis toy box, and today we're going to finish up most of the remaining logic. Last time we hooked up the logic for the CDA mission to rescue the children, but there are 3 other things that we're going to need logic for, and I thought we could do all 3 in one video, but as I was planning this out, I decided to save one of them for next time. But here are the 3 things that we still need. First, I want to populate this city with some townspeople. I don't like building cities that feel big and empty. I always want my cities to at least have some people walking around, and I like to have some activity too, like cars driving down the streets and planes or helicopters flying through the sky. Unfortunately, I don't have enough memory for moving vehicles like cars and helicopters flying around. But we can at least add some townspeople, so I want to set up a couple of zones in this toy box where we can add and remove townspeople. Second, I want to have some enemies show up while the mission is going, and so we're going to set up some enemy generation zones too. And third, we're going to need a little bit of logic for the race. I want to add a vehicle like Mike's car, and some vehicle weapon generators that will make the race down there a little bit more interesting. But we're going to save the racing logic for next time. So for today's episode, we'll focus on the enemy and townsperson generation zones. And I have already placed most of the creativitoys, actually all of them, that we're going to need for this. So let me show you what I've done. It's about 20 minutes or so of work that I did ahead of time for this video. But I dropped a button out here and a level starter. Of course, both of these are from the Creativitoys drawer. And then I've set up some locators and some other toys for the zones that we're going to need. And the idea is we're going to set up some zones around the toy box, and when the player enters those zones, we'll generate townspeople or enemies, and when players leave those zones and there's no players around those areas, then we'll take the enemies and townspeople out. And so the first zone over here by the courthouse is going to be centered around this locator that's right off the courthouse steps and right on this terrain seam. And for the enemy generation zone, we have 2 toys. We have an enemy wave generator and a dynamic trigger. And I'll show you what I've already connected those up to in a moment, but well, I can do that now, I guess. So I've got a locator sitting back over here with the little blue dot facing out towards the street here. I've got a couple more over there with the blue dot facing towards me, the camera position. And let's just work on the enemy zones first. I think that's going to be simpler. We'll save those toys for a little bit later. The next enemy generation zone is down here. So I dropped 2 locators back over in this corner. I placed 2 across the street over here around this tree. I can get to them. There you go. You can get a good look at them this way. The locator blue dots are facing over there. I added another locator over here. Okay. And this enemy wave generator is hooked up to the 4 locators that you see there. And I did that with a new locator connection. And then to save a little time, I configured the wave. And I added 1 of each of the paintball players, except for this one, I added 2 of them. Okay. So that's one enemy generation zone. The other one up here, by the way, I forgot to show you the enemies that I had set. And again, this one's connected up to those 3 locators that I showed before. And for this one, I have 1 of each of the paintball players. All right, the next enemy zone is down here. So I placed an enemy wave generator and a dynamic trigger here. This will be the center of the zone here at this locator. And I placed locator here behind the stairs. One over here at the top of the stairs, like he's coming out of that door. And then a couple on the other side of the street, like the enemies will be coming out of that those doors. And for the wave on this one, again, we have our 3 paintball players, and this time we have 2 of that guy. And then my 4th zone for enemies is going to be back over here by the clock tower. This one is connected up to locators, 2 of them over there, 1 over there. I'll give you a good look at these. So that's where this one is. 2 of them over there. And 1 over here near the clock tower. And I've got another locator I placed back here on that little train seam. And for the wave on this one, we have our same 3 paintball players, but again we have 2 of this guy. Alright, so that's everything that I've done ahead of time. And, oh, by the way, for the townsperson zone, I've got other controls here, but we'll cover those in a bit. Alright, so what I'm going to do is show you how to hook up the logic for one of these zones. And you can hook up the logic for the other 3 enemy zones the same way. Alright, so we'll hook up this one over here because it's a little bit closer to my level starter. But again, you need these 2 toys for that zone. And first thing we'll do is let's go ahead and hook up our dynamic trigger to the locator over here. This will be the center of our zone. And for the properties on this, the target needs to be the locator. And the trigger distance, which is the radius around this, is going to be set to 100. Typing that in on my Wii U handheld. There we go. Okay. And for the properties on this and all of the enemy wave generators, you're going to set these all the same. Just take the generation delay to 0. Leave all the rest of them set the way they are. Okay. All right. And then what we want to do for the enemy zones and the townsperson zones, because I have limited memory, I don't want both of them to be in here at the same time. So what we're going to do is when the player enters the toy box, the townspeople zones will be active. The enemy zones will be turned off. And we're only going to turn on the enemy zones when the mission starts. So when the mission starts, we're going to turn on the enemy zones and we're going to turn off the townspeople zones so that we don't have both of those in the toy box at the same time, because that will quickly eat up the memory and it might possibly crash my system if I use up all the memory. So these 2 zones are going to be mutually exclusive, and that's going to be true for all of the enemy zones and all the townspeople zones. All right. And so what we want to do then is come over to our level starter. And again, you're going to make these same connections for every enemy zone. I'm just going to show you this first one. But on the level starter, we'll do a new logic connection on catalyze. We will come up to the dynamic trigger for our enemy generation zone and turn it off. Okay. And because we're going to want to test this, I don't know if I'll do that in this video, but you'll want to hook up this button to do this so you don't have to exit out of the toy box and come back in. Alright, so the level starter will disable that. Now when the mission starts, we want to have it turn on the enemy generation zones. And for that, you're going to come over to the logic here for the mission giver. So on this dynamic trigger for the mission giver that we set up last time, you're going to do a new logic connection when entered by player any. So when the mission starts, the player talks to the approaches the mission giver and talks to them. We will come over here and turn on the enemy generation zone. And you're going to do that same connection for the other 3 enemy zones. And then when the mission is over and all of the children have been rescued, we'll come to our friendly wave generator, do a new logic connection. When the wave is defeated, so all the children have been put in the collection pen there, then we're going to come back up to our enemy zone and turn it off. Okay. All right, so that governs when this zone will be active. Now, when the zone is active, this dynamic trigger, which has set up a 100 unit radius around that locator, will kick off the zone and generate the enemies. So on this dynamic trigger, a new logic connection, when entered by player any, will come over to our enemy wave generator and generate the wave. Okay? And that will put the enemies in this zone in the toy box. And we only want to do this once. So if the player comes back to this area multiple times during the mission, I don't want to keep having the same enemy spawn here every time, because that will get annoying. So on the enemy wave generator, we'll do a new logic connection. When the wave is generated, we're going to come back over to this dynamic trigger and turn it off. So this will only happen one time. Okay? And that's it for the enemy generation zone. It's pretty straightforward. And again, you're going to hook up the other 3 zones the exact same way. You're going to make the same connections over there to the level starter and the 2 mission toys, the dynamic trigger and friendly wave generator, and then you're going to connect up these 2 toys just like we did. One thing I will show you that's different for each zone is the dynamic trigger. So you're going to hook this one up over here to this locator. If I can select it, there we go. And for this one on the properties, again, the target would have to be the locator. The trigger distance on this one, you're going to set to 50. But everything else will be the same as far as the logic goes. For the zone back here by the clock tower, excuse me, new locator connection on that dynamic trigger connected up to this locator back here. And on this one, you'll set the properties again so the target is the locator. Trigger distance on this one is going to be set to 144. Okay. And that will create a large radius around there that will work for when you're coming down the street this way or you're coming around the bend over this way. All right, so either one of those will cause that zone to get generated. And then again, hook up those 2 toys the same way as that first zone we did. And over here, at the starting line for the race, you'll hook that dynamic trigger up to this locator. And for the properties on this one, excuse me, you will set this to be the locator. Trigger distance on this one will be 70. Oops, not 7. 70. There we go. And then you'll hook up those 2 toys, just like we did for this enemy zone up here. So that's it for the enemy generation zones. And by the way, I do have logic diagrams on my blog that will help you out. I'll mention that again at the end of the video, but it can help to reference those during the video as we go along. Okay, so now we have our enemy zones. Let's go ahead and hook up the friendly wave generators, or friendly zones, the townspeople zones. Brain's not working there. For these zones, we need 5 toys. So we have a locator here that I've placed in front of those stairs. We have another dynamic trigger. We have a logic gate, a counter, and a replayer. So this zone is going to be a little bit different because some of the townspeople that I want to use are not part of the friendly wave generator. If they were, I could just do the same logic that I did for the enemy generation zones and just substitute the enemy wave generator for the friendly wave generator. We'd be all set. But 2 of the townspeople that I want to use from Disney Infinity 1.0 for monsters, they're not available through the friendly wave generator. So we have to do something a little bit different. And so for that, we're going to use the replayer to put these townspeople down for the friendly wave, for the friendly zones. So on the replayer, we'll set the playback interval to 0. Then we're going to come out of the editor, and we're going to step on the replayer, which gets us our little menu in the lower right. On my Wii U, I press B to start recording, which changes the icon there under the B button. And then we step off so we can get back into the editor. And for the townspeople here, most of the ones I want to use are under cast members, which are available in the friendly wave generator, but I'm going to put Terry and Terry out here. So we'll drop them down. We'll put Squishy over here, off the end of the street, like about here. We'll put Don Carlton over on this corner. And we'll put Art over here. Just to spread them around a little bit. Alright, so that's 4 people. I want a total of 6. So if we come to Disney Infinity 1.0 playset people and we go left, we've got these little alien guys. And this one, the alien Twitch, kind of looks like a monster that would be walking around in the Monsters, Inc. universe. And so I'm going to go ahead and place him over here by this doorway. And another one that I thought could be interesting. We could put this one down. We could put any number of these. They're all kind of unique. There's also some Star Wars people, by the way, that you could put down. And actually, I think that's one of them that I used. Let me scroll over to the right here. This guy kind of looks like somebody who'd be in the Monsters world. So we'll put him kind of over here. So that's 6 of them. And now we'll exit out of the editor. We'll step back on our replayer to get our menu in the lower right. On my Wii U, I press B to stop recording and A to clear. Okay, so that takes them out. And by the way, come over here by the starting point of the race. I had added 2 steps in here, 2 stairs that I didn't intend to add during the build. So we're going to take that one out and that one out. Because otherwise they're just too evenly spaced down the street here. So we'll take those out. And I think that just looks a little bit nicer. We still have a few that are regularly spaced over here, but at least the whole street's not that way. All right. So now, with the townsperson zones, these we want to be active by default when we come in the toy box. And by default, the dynamic triggers are on, so we don't have to hook this one up to a level starter. We could, if we wanted to have it turn it on, but that's kind of redundant because it's already on. But we do want to disable this during the mission and re-enable it when the mission is over. And so you're going to set up both townsperson zones the same way. I'm going to show you how to do this one. You can do the logic for the one up here the same way. Okay, so I'm only going to show you the one. Alright, so we come over to the dynamic trigger for our mission giver, which is this guy. And we'll do a new logic connection when entered by player any. So again, the player approaches the mission giver and talks to them. That starts the mission. And when the mission starts, we want to turn off the townspeople zones. So we want to come over to this dynamic trigger and turn it off. And again, you'll want to do that for the same townsperson zone up at the courthouse. And on the friendly wave generator over here, new logic connection when the wave is defeated and the mission is over. All the children have been rescued. We want to turn the townsperson generation zones back on. So you'll make that same connection for the other zone up at the courthouse as well. Okay, so this zone is going to be tied to a locator. So we'll do a new locator connection, and we're going to connect it up to this locator. And on the properties for this, target needs to be the locator. And the trigger distance, we're going to set this to be 120. Okay. And on the counter, let's go ahead and set those properties while we're right here. Everything here is fine, we just want to turn off the visible display. So what we're going to do here is when the player enters the zone, we're going to do a playback on the replayer. We only want to do this one time, because if we play back a replayer that has already been played back, we can corrupt the replayer. And so this is why we have the logic gate here. And so on the logic gate, or on the dynamic trigger, we're going to do a new logic connection when entered by player any. We're going to come to our logic gate and do an input. And on the logic gate, new logic connection on output. Come over to our replayer and do a playback. And on the replayer, a new logic connection. When this is played back, we're going to turn around, come back to our logic gate and close it. So that if a second player enters the zone, it'll try to input into this gate. The gate will be closed and the signal won't go anywhere. That guarantees that the replayer only gets played back one time. Now when both players leave the zone, we need to clear the replayer. And so for that we have a counter. And the counter is going to keep track of the number of players that are in this zone at any time. So on the dynamic trigger, we'll do a new logic connection when entered by player any. We'll come over to the counter, and we're going to increment the counter by 1. So every time a player enters the zone, we increment the counter. And likewise, every time a player leaves the zone, we want to decrement the counter. So on the dynamic trigger, a new logic connection when exited by player any. We come over to our counter and we decrement by 1. Okay? And then when the counter reaches 0, then we can clear our replayer and reopen that gate. So on the counter, a new logic connection when 0 is reached we will clear the replayer. And on the counter, a new logic connection when 0 is reached. We open up the logic gate so that when a player comes back to the zone, the signal can get through here to the replayer and do a playback. So that's the logic for the Townspeople zones. And you can set up the logic up here at the courthouse for these 4 controls the exact same way I just did those. The only difference here is that this dynamic trigger, you'll connect that up with a new locator connection to this locator. But the properties on here will be the same. So you're going to set this to be the locator. You're going to set the trigger distance to be 120. And then all the logic connections over here are going to be the same. One thing we will do, I will show you where I placed my townspeople up here. So we'll step on our replayer. I start recording. Oops, there's my enemies. Didn't want to do that. Alright, so then we're going to set our enemies up around here. And exactly where you decide to place these doesn't really matter. We're not going to use all of the same townspeople. I could use all of them, but we're just going to put a few up here. So we'll put Don Carlton over there. Maybe put Art over here. Like he's coming out of that building. We'll put Squishy up here at the courthouse. And we can just kind of drop him. He'll fall down there to the ground. Terry and Terry we can put over here. Maybe like they're coming out of that building. And then if you wanted, you could put the same townspeople in here. Notice I'm using the exact same townspeople that I used in the other zone. And I'm doing that to save memory. Because I don't want to put different townspeople up here. Because I don't have enough memory for a ton of different townspeople. So I could put this guy around here too, but that should be sufficient. And we got that guy to deal with. I have to turn off this replayer first before I do anything else. Oh no! So I'm not sure what'll happen if I kill him while I'm got the replayer recording. Alright, so we stop, we clear, and now let's take care of you. Looks like we still have an enemy over here. Yeah. Dodge and weave. Oh, he still got me. Okay. So lesson learned. After you hook up the enemy generation zones, you should probably come over to the level starter over here and push this button. That'll turn off all the enemy zones. This is why we have that button here and why I hooked it up. I should have come over and pushed it. Oh well. Made for an interesting video anyway. And there we go. Once you hook up the logic for the other townspeople zone at the courthouse and the other enemy zones, then you can move all of the creativitoys below the terrain to hide them out of sight, and you'll be finished. You can do that for all the zones. You can do that for the mission logic as well. Next time, we'll add the remaining bit of logic for the race, and then we'll go racing. I had promised back in episode 1 that I would show you the racetrack later, and so after we hook up the logic, I'll demo the race for you. It'll be a short episode next time, but it will be a fun one. So be sure to come back next time to see that, or better yet, subscribe to my channel so you don't forget. And for those of you who are following along and building this toy box on your own systems, let me remind you that I have logic diagrams on my blog that may help you out. The link is in the video description. That's all for me today. Take care.